Hi everyone, I am Annie Ravago and today me and Angela will be talking about video haptics and erotics.
Good day everyone, I am Angela Dominic Policarpio and I am here to tackle about the video haptics and erotics. So according to Laura Enriquez, it is sensing the internal, which is, and external, or in Tagalog, panloob. Laura also adds a dimension about touching the internal, which is in Tagalog, pagkapa ng panloob. So, haptic perception is a combination of tactile, kinesthetic, and also the proprioceptive functions. In haptic visuality, the eyes themselves functions like a organ of touch.
Utility involved when its twin response from the internal parts of our body generate haptic perceptions. The difference between haptic and optical visuality is the importance of the degree.
This is a core example of touch as a sensitive tool to understand arts.
In haptic visuality, the eyes themselves function like organs of touch. Haptic visuality, a term contrasted to optical visuality, draws from other forms of sense experience, primarily touch and kinesthetics. Because haptic visuality draws upon other senses, the viewer's body is more obviously involved in the process of being than is the case with optical visuality. Haptic cinema does not invite identification with a figure so much as it encourages a body relationship between the viewers and the video image. Thus, it is not proper to speak of the object of a haptic look so much as to speak of a dynamic subjectively between a looker and image, because haptic visuality tends less to isolate and focus upon objects than simply to be in their presence. If one understands film viewing an exchange between two bodies, that of the viewer and that of the film, then the characterization of the film viewer as passive, vicarious, or projective must be replaced with a model of a viewer who participates in the production of the cinematic experience. Cinematic perception is not merely visual but kinesthetic, an act in which the senses and the intellect are not conceived of as separate. When vision yields to the diminished capacity of video, it gives up some degree of mastery. Our vision dissolves in part of the eroticism of this medium is its incompleteness, the inability ever to see all because it is so grainy, its figures mere suggestions. Haptic images are erotic regardless of their content because they construct an intersubjective relationship between beholder and image. The viewer is called upon to fill in the gaps in the image, engage with the traces the image leaves by interacting up close with an image, close enough that figure and ground comingly. The viewer gives up her own sense of separateness from the image. Haptic media encourages a relationship to the screen itself before the point at which the viewer is pulled into the figures of the image and the exhortation of the narrative. Tactile epistemology involves thinking with your skin, or giving as much significance to the physical presence of an other as to the mental operations of symbolization. This is not a call to willful regression, but a recognition of the intelligence of the perceiving body. Haptic cinema, by appearing to us as an object with which we interact rather than illusion into which we enter, calls upon this sort of embodied intelligence. In the dynamic movement between optical and haptic ways of seeing, it is impossible to compare different ways of knowing and interacting with an other. The effect of this surface density is to invite a kind of vision that spreads out over the surface of the image instead of penetrating into depth. Getting a sense of touch by looking at hands would seem to require identifying with a person whose hands they are, yet to the degree that the hands become characters in the story. The haptic bypasses such identification, being instead an identification with touch itself. As Merleau-Ponty wrote, to perceive is to render oneself present to something through the body. How does video achieve a haptic character? It is commonly argued that film is a tactile medium and video an optical one. Since film can be actually worked with the hands, now that more films are edited and post-produced with the video or computer technologies, this distinction is losing its significance. The unfulfilling or unsatisfactory space of video. The ideal relationship between viewer and optical image tends to be one of mastery, in which the viewer isolates and comprehends the objects of vision. The ideal relationship between viewer and haptic image is one of mutuality, in which the viewer is more likely to lose himself in the image, to lose his sense of proportion. When vision is like touch, the object's touch back may be like a caress, though it may also be violent, a violence not towards the object but towards the viewer. Violence may occur in an abrupt shift from haptic to optical image, confronting the viewer with an object whole and distant where she had been contemplating it close up and in a part. Haptic visuality implies a tension between viewer and image. Then, because this violent potential is always there, haptic visuality implies making oneself vulnerable to the image, reversing the relation of mastery that characterizes optical viewing. The pulling back movement powerfully evokes a child's gradual realization of separateness from its mother and the ability to recognize objects, to recognize the mother's body as a separate body that is also desired by someone else. It also describes a movement from a haptic way of seeing to a more optical way of seeing. The figure is separate, complete, objectifiable, and indeed already claimed. At the point where the image of the mother becomes recognizable, narrative rushes in. I lose myself as a subject of consciousness to the degree that I allow myself to be susceptible to contact with the other. Video Haptics and Erotics, written by Laura Marks, definitely changed my perception of relationship that a person can have towards a screen. This repeated idea of thinking with your skin or having eyes function as organs of touch seems to be the key point that Marx is trying to convey, bringing the subject of a flat space of a screen into a physical and tangible realm in which we naturally reside. I think that haptic video requires not only the right subject matter and to be displayed in a way that extends the boundaries of the screen, but also that the viewer be aware and active so that they aren't just watching but develop a relationship with the screen and interact with it accordingly. If a viewer watches haptic videos with the sole intent to critique from an outside space by positioning their intellectual thinking themselves as separate to the work, then I don't think that the video will have the same effect as someone who positions themselves on mutual ground on the video. So it is not just the responsibility of the video to draw a person in, that viewer must have a trust and willingness to let themselves be given up to the video.